Welcome to Leaf Status Report for January 9th, 2026. Today, we've simulated the rest of the NHL regular season 11,000 times, with Leafs performances across all simulated seasons forming this distribution. The Leafs did manage to beat the Philadelphia Flyers 2-1 in overtime last night. Mind you, Austin Matthews did kind of almost sell the game multiple times in overtime with very bad giveaways. However, Dennis Hildeby did multiple masterclasses to get rid of all of those breakaway chances, and Easton Cowan ends up getting the overtime winner, which, very, very, very good for him. Other than that, other than the very nice 2 points the Leafs get from that game, there are a lot of other fairly decent results. Unfortunately, most of the teams we're focusing on ahead of the Leafs did end up winning their games. The Sabres beat the Rangers 5-2. The Penguins beat the Devils 4-1. However, a lot of the other teams behind the Leafs lost their games, with the Senators getting murdered by the Avalanche 8-2, and the Blue Jackets losing to the Golden Knights 5-3. Most importantly, though, the Florida Panthers lost to Montreal 6-2, which I'm very happy about, because it does mean that the Leafs will now be ahead of the Panthers in today's expected points rankings, which will gain them a projected spot in the Eastern Conference standings. Overall, the Leafs managed to gain 1.25 expected points over yesterday, going from 91.99 yesterday to 93.24 today. In addition to this, based on the theoretical value of expected points we've calculated, I am saying that our simulations collectively are not over or underestimating the Leafs by any significant margin. As always, the Leafs' expected points change breaks down into 4 controllable factors and randomness. Because the Leafs were expected to score on average 1.15 points in their game against the Flyers in the standings, and they ended up winning that game, it is a clean gain of 0.85 expected points from game result alone. In addition, substituting yesterday's game data for the Leafs into today's simulations yielded an additional gain of 0.4 expected points. We do lose a bit from substituting the rest of yesterday's game data into today's simulations. However, it almost perfectly cancels with the additional luck we got from randomness today. With substituting the rest of yesterday's game results into today's simulations yielding a net loss of 0.06 expected points. Randomness favored the Leafs today by 0.06 expected points more than it did yesterday. In essence, our expected points change breaks down to exactly game result gain plus Leafs data gain. The minimum number of points the Leafs scored in a season today was 71, and the maximum number of points they scored in a season today was 113. That gives us an absolute range today of 42 points. Our inner 70% interval remains 12 points wide, but it does shift upwards by 1 point on either end. With our 15th percentile Leaf season being 87 points today, and our 85th percentile Leaf season being 99 points. As always, when the Leafs play a game, our standard deviation has gone down by a noticeable amount. It was 5.87 points yesterday, and today it's down to 5.69 points. The Leafs managed to gain 6.9% on their playoff odds today. Yesterday, they made the playoffs in 39.5% of all simulations, and today they have managed to make the playoffs in 46.4% of all simulations. Our 95% confidence interval for these playoff odds is unsurprisingly still below 1%, sitting at plus or minus 0.93%. Beyond this, unsurprisingly as well, the Leafs Cup odds also increase, given that they have made more playoff appearances in our simulations. Yesterday it was 1.17% chance for them to win the Cup, and today I have our simulations projecting a 1.45% chance of them winning the Cup. Beyond this, the conditional probability of the Leafs winning the Cup, given that they make the playoffs, has also slightly edged itself up. Yesterday, that was a 2.96% chance. Today, it's up to 3.13%. Looking at the general EP spread across the entire league, the Leafs now sit 16th place in total expected points, with 14 teams still within one standard deviation of them. I also figured this might be a pretty good place to slide in the total Stanley Cup winners across all of my simulations. I mean, we can clearly see that Colorado and Tampa Bay are pretty much the consensus favorites to come out of each of their conferences to meet the Stanley Cup Finals. However, there are still pretty decent prospects for most of these NHL teams. 31 NHL teams won the Stanley Cup in at least one simulation I conducted today. Unfortunately, the odd one out is the Calgary Flames, but you know. However, there's also 18 NHL teams that won the Stanley Cup in at least 1% of total simulations, which is everyone from the Philadelphia Flyers upwards today. Taking a brief look at the table, as I did mention earlier, the Leafs do manage to gain an extra spot in our projections over yesterday, leapfrogging the Florida Panthers for that wildcard 4 projection. Running over the basic margins to start, the Leafs now sit 15.98 expected points behind the division-leading Tampa Bay Lightning, 6.90 expected points behind second in the Atlantic, still held by Montreal, 3.02 expected points behind third in the Atlantic, still held by Detroit, and they've now narrowed that playoff gap down to 1.61 expected points, with that playoff threshold team still being the Pittsburgh Penguins. Of course, there are a number of seismic changes to account for on the table today, given the number of surprisingly wide margins of victory we had in games last night. I think the two main ones really are our wildcard 5 and 6 teams below the Leafs. It does give them a bit of safety in the next couple days to not have to worry about being passed for position unless things go very, very bad. Of course, first of all, Florida Panthers lose over 2.5 expected points margin on the Leafs because they did lose to the Montreal Canadiens 6-2. I feel very bad for Sergei Bobrovsky. It was not his night, and those things are going to happen sometimes. As for the Ottawa Senators, they lose almost 3 expected points gap on the Leafs because of their throttling 8-2 versus the Colorado Avalanche, including letting in 6 goals in the second period. Again, very, very tough night for them, but these things are going to happen, and if you're a Leafs fan, you might feel kind of good about it. If you want a Canadian team to win, maybe not so much. Taking a very quick look at the Leafs' placing distribution today. Not too surprising, that A3 spot is still our number 1 most common playoffs finish. Of course, mind you, it's far from guaranteed. It's still just a little better than a 14% chance of happening. But that is a notable increase from yesterday when it was just above 12. In addition, we can very much see that tail end of our distribution really starting to taper off now. Wildcards 9 and 10 are really starting to fade, and we can start to see even wildcards 6, 7, and 8 really diminishing in probability. Mind you, like I did say yesterday, for these patterns to continue, the Leafs do need to keep winning games and keep performing on par or better than what I'm expecting. However, we're feeling a bit more optimistic after especially Dennis Hildebe's performance last night. Lucky for me, I get a bit of a break from the long lists of key games that I usually have to cover. There's really only one today, which is when the Chicago Blackhawks host the Washington Capitals at 8 p.m. Now, I haven't put up the table, but I will give you the rough margins here. I have the Capitals with about a 55.16% chance to win this game, and an expected points yield of 1.22. Overall, based on how close the Capitals currently are to the Leafs, I think we'd be fine with an overtime loss here if we're willing to play the long game. However, if we really want to see the Capitals behind the Leafs in tomorrow's projections, we do need a multi-goal regulation loss. Still, I do think we have time. I think we can afford that just a bit over 0.2 expected point underperformance to wait it out perhaps, or perhaps just rely on any of the other 3 teams within 2 expected points of the Leafs to falter in the next couple days and have the Leafs pass them instead. Rest of the Canadian teams, no big changes on major playoff prospects, and also the Canadian team's cup odds have gone down to 9.15% today.